I invite you to stand with me now for the hearing of the gospel lesson, today found in the Gospel of Luke's 24th chapter. Then he, meaning Jesus, said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. And see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." Then he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. While he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up into heaven. And they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. And they were continually in the temple, blessing God. The gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Thanks be to God.
I love Google Maps. It may be one of the top 5 websites that I visit regularly. If I'm hearing about a new place or going to a new place, one of the first things I might do is run to my computer and visit it electronically right on my laptop. My son Kyle, who has been in Korea for almost a little over a year, sent me in Korean the address of his school. Obviously, I cannot read Korean, but I know how to copy and paste. Which I did, and there Google Maps, which is a lot smarter than I am, I'm taken around the world, and there, from a bird's eye view, I see Kyle's school. Imagining that little speck, that must be Kyle walking into the building right now. If you say, "Come to my house," and you give me your address, I might look at your house before I actually show up there. And how often have we learned about the world and our place in the lay of the land through Google Maps? When I hear about the ascension of Jesus, I have to say that one of the first things I think about, believe it or not, is Google Maps. Well, let me unpack that a little bit for you. Here's this one who was born, who lived, who loved, who taught, who healed, who was kind, who others later will say about him, that was a perfect life. That was the most perfect life we could ever imagine. And then, at the close of his days, the most all-imagining experience that this wonderful one that lived with such intense love suffers a terrible death, to be tortured, and to hang on the brutality of the grotesque Roman cross, where all seems like hope is lost. It's the darkest of all dark days. And then, that period is a season, 3 days long, and he is risen from the grave. And mysteriously now, he is with these same people that knew him in the flesh, but he seems not to be bound by space or by time in the way that other humans are so conditioned, so bound. He's there, but he's not there. He's elusive. It's wonderful to see him again, but we can't hold on to him. And then, poof, he's gone. Vanished. One commentator said that if this experience happened to you, can you imagine this stranger comes into your life and relates to you with such a love intensity where all the things about your life are found into a new hue, a new color, a new experience, a new perspective, that this person got close to you and was a part of your life, and then it went through the same kind of story of dying and rising again and then vanishing, that wouldn't you spend the rest of your life trying to find him again, looking everywhere? Where is he now? Where can I see him? Will I have another cross experience, a brush with greatness? Another experience of such loving, graceful intensity? Wouldn't it be what we would all crave and want and look forward to and hope for? Well, this is why I think Jesus in part is like Google Maps, in my experience at least, having the Jesus experience as a part of my life for so many years. That somehow I believe, and I hope you do too, in transcendence, that I can rise out of my current situation, away from the confusion of the twisting streets and the tall buildings, and have a different perspective on my life, a different vantage point in which to see how things are, how I fit into the land of my own history. And Jesus invites me to transcend, to join him, to leave this perspective and allow him to whisper in the voice of the Spirit and in the power of the resurrection, this is who you are, this is your life, this is what you perhaps should be thinking about and being about and living through. Perhaps you can think of moments like that in your life. I have so many, I don't really even know which ones to describe. I'm going to talk about quickly two. One is as a 13-year-old boy riding a yellow school bus on Wilson, Downing, and Lansdowne. That pink house that's there was still there back then. We called it the Good and Plenty House. My dad was in the military. I had traveled all over the world, and I remember thinking about Jesus and Jesus' love for people, taking that corner around the Good and Plenty House, never knowing in a million years, really a much shorter time than that in God's grace, I would be pastor of a church at a location that didn't even exist when I was having that experience just a few blocks away. Or maybe the time when I was 19 years old and it was a chilly Christmas Eve night and I was with one of my best friends at the time and he was challenging me about my life's direction. I was a sophomore in college. I hadn't declared a major, and he says, you know, you really need to get your life together. I've called him and said, can you come and talk to my sons now? And it was that moment that he challenged me as I really thought about that only when I was your pastor in that first month at the old building at 1644 Nicholsville Road, that I remember the stoplight where that conversation occurred was right in the front door of the old building of the old church. That looking in the rearview mirror of my life, I see these beautiful crisscrossing lines, these intersections, these moments of grace, where God has weaved a golden thread into the fabric of my own being, reminding me that I'm not alone or that I'm not forgotten, that I matter, and God cares about me. We're currently involved in a project here that we want to hear your stories. We want to have you share some experiences in your life. They don't have to be extraordinary because mostly God operates in the ordinariness of your life. You have a sacred story. You don't even know what it is. Or perhaps you don't even claim it as being sacred, but it is your story. Aaron, I asked him this morning, I said, how's the project going on getting people to share their stories? He said, well, they'll talk to me at length until I push the record button on the cassette player. And then we get bashful. Well, it's okay to tell you my story, but do I really want to tell my story? I hope you do, because that's how we will become a better community. And as we try to assimilate new people and get to know new people, you need to know their story, they need to know your story. Eventually, Aaron will put some of these up in podcast. So after you're finished with Google Maps, you can run over here And you can hear a delightful story about a person that you have community of faith with and hear how God's sacred life has intersected into their life. It's a wonderful blessing. It's a light we have to share. I've been doing some reading in the past couple of months, I guess, on changing perspectives, looking at things from a different vantage point. Sometimes it's a painful revelation to see a period of history from maybe a different perspective, and I've been particularly impressed by Willie James Jennings' book, The Christian Imagination. In it, he tells in his first chapter of Zeruah's tears. Zeruah, a royal historian for Portugal, who is watching the slave trade as it's just beginning to be introduced into the Portuguese society. This opportunity that small country had to become a European world power because of slavery, and amidst that, from that period of time, shamefully, a theology was working which basically said that God owns everything and God has dominion over everything, and if we act on God's behalf, then we are ennobled to do whatever we feel we should do in order to help God's world be subdued and managed, compressed. Which meant at the time, the most shameful part of considering other humans subhuman and validating the ownership of those humans for your own economic benefit. What a terrible story. The Christian Zeruah, watching this, though, suggests that perhaps with the newly captive Africans, there might be able to be seen also a similarity into the suffering and agony of the captive Jesus, who himself was tortured, who himself was bound, who himself was crushed by the intentions of greed and selfishness. It reminded me of another book that I've been going through, Edward Baptist's book, The Half That's Never Been Told, Slavery and American Capitalism. In that book, he quotes a Kentucky slave owner in the mid-19th century. When there weren't buildings for folks to come to church, oftentimes the plantation owner in the mid-19th century would gather folks on his front yard for Sunday service. This is what he told them in one sermon. The slaves gathered in this front yard for worship. The great mountain above has made you for the benefit of the white man, who is your lawmaker and lawgiver. We should be a little ashamed of that. I am. But Baptist goes on to write, enslaved people, however, believed otherwise. They continued to flock to churches even if ministers turned their backs on them and to hold their own religious meetings as well. For in the story of Jesus, believers found kinships and a promise. Jesus was a God-made mortal, a wrongly captured man who endured torture and violent death. Forced migrants already knew what it was like to be on a journey into a grave. But the story told them that Jesus had risen from his tomb and returned to tell his captives of a new kingdom whose gate he had opened. I see in Jesus this intersection, this place where things can be joined together that in times past were ripped apart. That in the cross of Christ there is this vertical command to love God and this horizontal equal command to love our neighbor, and we hold those in tension with each other. That Jesus stands as a bridge between my past of shamefulness and my future of new possibility. That Jesus is the one who holds all this together and invites me to lift myself out of my own selfishness, my own narrow perspective, my own inaccuracies and fallacies and problems, and rise up. Rise up. Rise up out of the mire and the muck and the yuck of this earthly existence that so often is infused with nothing but terror. And have faith in a God who can raise us from the dead and bring possibility where before all we saw was impossibility. Jesus offers us a God's point of view on our struggling humanity and inspires us and encourages us to live in the new reality that we call God's kingdom. What is the ascension? Isn't it God's reverent compliment to the sacredness of your humanity? That the good things that were done in the life of Jesus can now be done in your life? That if Jesus was still here with us physically, we might always say, well, Jesus, get busy. But God's compliment for you, the church, is that this life that we celebrate from Advent to Ascension was given to us as a model and an example so that we might learn how to love and forgive and serve and be generous and kind just as He was. The remarkable thing about the life of Jesus is not that it's gone. The remarkable thing about the life of Jesus is that it was even given to us in the first place. We have what we need, except perhaps the will to change. The will to be different. The will to have a different perspective, to be lifted out of our own prejudice and background and live into the life-liberating call of the gospel. The comedian George Carlin once made fun of religion. He said, "We believe in an invisible man who's always watching everything that we do." And he says, "I have a special list of 10 things that I want you to pay attention to. But I also have a special place of fire and torture and anguish. And if you mess up any one of those 10 things, then you will be sent to burn and to choke and to scream and to cry for all eternity because of your mistakes. Oh, and by the way, I love you. And I need your money." But the all-powerful, the all-knowing, the all-loving God will watch your every P and Q, and if you don't get it all lined out and spelled correctly, if your Korean's out of order, you get something mixed up, well then, sorry about your luck, and I'm pretty good at knowing all things and being all things and helping all things. I just don't manage money very well, so please give me what you got. What a caricature of our faith. And maybe that's why we're a little bit uncomfortable with this idea of God watching over us, because we may have a George Carlin kind of theology. The God who with folded arms watches us sternly like a parent. I don't know in there. Not going to measure up. Oh, you really made a mistake. Oh, look how funny. Oh, my goodness. Have you seen what they do? Is that how God operates? Is that who we really think God is? Better. Is that the God Jesus in love through suffering and death revealed God to be? Is it the invitation that there is a God who knows you and loves you and cares for you? Didn't Jesus say something about God knows the number of hairs on your head? That God has more regard for you than you have regard for your problem? That God has more confidence in you than you have confidence in yourself? That God is always willing and ready with open arms to invite you, to welcome you, to lift you up as a celebrated and beloved child? We are invited as God's people to have a transcendent, redemptive, life-transforming perspective. If we will open our minds, if we will listen to each other, we will surrender our will, the possible becomes impossible. And you don't need a Wi-Fi connection to make it happen.